Welcome to The Keys to Your Legacy with your host, Elijah Keys. In each episode, Elijah will have a conversation with other professionals to discuss how their fields relate to trust and estate planning. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, keyslawgroup.com. Now here's the host of The Keys to Your Legacy, Elijah Keys.
Hi, thanks so much for joining us on Keys to Your Legacy. This is a podcast focused on trust and estates issues. Every 2 weeks, we meet with another professional whose work isn't centrally related to trust and estates, but definitely can help lend to and definitely is related to estate planning. So today, we are so privileged and happy to meet with Patricia Zerbini. Patricia, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. Sharing the little bit that I know about my crossover with family law with you and estate and planning. It's been a while, so it's good to see you.
It is. So Patricia and I went to law school together. This is 15 years ago we graduated, something like that.
Yeah.
It's been a long time. And I've certainly kept watching what you're doing, right? It's very interesting. We were friends, or we are friends, right? But a lot has changed. So tell us about yourself.
Well, I would say not much has changed other than I've got tons of kids, as do you. We have started our own families and continue to build our practices. Right now I'm in family law, which is kind of where I've always saw myself, even when we were in law school.
Okay.
I'm helping families get through the tough life decisions in splitting up their finances, the custody of their children, support, and as it relates to you, figuring out what to do with their trust and estate plans pending that final dissolution.
Yeah. There's so many times people come in and they're talking about that. Where are you from originally?
Bay Area. I was born in Hayward. Then I moved to Florida with my mom across country. We lived there for a few years. My dad moved out to Florida, and then my mom moved us back to California. So definitely custody is a big mantle that I've taken on for other little children like myself who have to go through it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, your history kind of frames how you're going to be as an adult, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have a lot of kids. How many kids do you have?
So my husband has two older ones, 15 and 11, and then we have two little ones. They are 7 and 5, so four total.
So you kind of run the gambit of teenage all the way down to just entering kindergarten, right?
Yes, the littlest one is entering kindergarten right now. The oldest is going into his sophomore year. So yeah, by doing all the phases all at once.
Well, talk to us about having a blended family, because that's kind of unique to your area of law and my area of law, that we deal with blended families a lot. Talk to us about how that process. I don't want to probe too deeply, but talk to us about living in a blended family. What is it like?
Well, it's hard for me because I kind of have to do what I do for work at home in terms of trying to remain composed, calm, cool, collected when difficult issues come up. And in my family, because I'm also the attorney, I do not get involved. I am just stepmom, and my husband and I have that boundary where I'm not taking on that attorney role. I don't know if his co-parent sees it that way, but that is the role that I've aligned myself with. Is I'm just here to be a stepmom and a bonus mom to these kids and love them and provide them as much support and guidance as I can and be an advocate for them when needed, but not in terms of their co-parenting relationship. And I feel that in terms of what I see as a family law attorney, a lot of times the step parent steps into that parent role, and we have to remind ourselves we're not the real parent. I mean, we absolutely love these children and we're going to raise them.
Yeah.
But these life decisions, whether they go to which school, which therapist, what IEP we're going to be fighting for, what services, needs to be between the parents. And we, as the step parent, should only have a supporting role.
Well, that's really interesting that you say that. I've been curious about that myself. So can you expand on that a little bit when you're talking about a co-parenting role versus a step parent? What is the clear distinction between the two? And if people are listening to this, what sort of things should they be thinking about to actually determine what makes a good step parent versus a good co-parent?
So I feel that there's been this trend to have step parents be so involved in the family between the real parents. I say real parents, but for lack of a better term, just to make it easier to understand the difference, because we all are parents. But I feel the line is crossed when the step parent is involved with making decisions about doctors. So they'll take the child to the doctor, and then we'll have to be on the hook to explain to the other parent what happened at that doctor's appointment.
Oh, that's a bad idea.
Terrible idea. And the line gets really blurred. And that's what I think needs to remain parent versus step parent. Supporting step parent, if there's an emergency and something happens and this kid needs to get to the doctor for something, then they can step in and that makes sense. But actually going out of your way and being the real parent and scheduling the appointments and taking them and taking on that mantle, I think is, from my perspective, too much and not something that I would want me as a step parent or, the other step parent that's raising our other two kids taking on for themselves. The real bio parents, or even if you're adoptive parents, but those parents are the ones that should be in charge of the health, safety, and welfare of the children. If there's an IEP meeting, I'll go to support and listen because I want to know what things I need to do at home to support this child that's also in my home. But I'm not going to be sitting there advocating for any services or anything like that. That's between the parents.
So the IEP being interventional education plan. So
Yeah,
a public school plan for a child who is struggling in one or more ways.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
And so these meetings are set up between the parents and the school personnel and the different programs that they have. And even I, as minors counsel, will sit on them to advocate for my client. But I'm, again, letting the parents parent and me being in a supporting role.
I'm really glad you talked about that. Now, I want to bring this back to our podcast and explain why I think that we might explore that line. And that's because, as an estate planning attorney, oftentimes I deal with families who are blended families. And so the custodial parent and the step parent are making decisions about what they want to happen to their estate. But it's a very interesting crossover because when the natural parent dies, the step parent does not step into the place and become a custodial parent. It doesn't work that way. So there's this whole estate plan that I have prepared that is there to take the natural parent's money and use it for the child and the step parent, but the step parent has no say in how the child lives their lives. So it creates this kind of this pressure between the, why don't we say not conflict, but pressure maybe between the other custodial parent and the step parent, where the step parent's in control of money that's supposed to go to the child, but they have to deal with the custodial parent now, who is not their partner, right? The former spouse, right? Or the former partner. It creates this whole weird situation. But anyway, so interesting thing here is that I was looking over your favorite quote, and I see here it says, and I'll just read it to you. It says, happiness can be found even in the darkest of times if one only remembers to turn on the light. Where does that come from?
Harry Potter and Dumbledore in the last movie. It is something that I've used even throughout law school and studying for the bar and in my career, is that with all the, I don't want to say trauma, but self-inflicted masochism might be the best word here
I
that
think
we
that's
go
right.
through
That's a good word. Yeah.
to help those, right? Because I became an attorney to help those around me and give back what I can. That even when it is tough and I am exhausted and I'm tired and I don't have any energy left to give, and I feel that I'm fighting the big fight against, this person or that person, putting my own clients' children's before my own clients' interests sometimes, which we can talk about another day. But, just to remember that there's hope and not to give up that hope. And I just need to look for that little glimmer to get me through those tough times.
Yeah. What is the light to you? So, I mean, J.K. Rowling here is talking about turning on the light. And of course, Dumbledore is her arch character that she is releasing all of her wisdom through, right? And he makes mistakes and makes bad decisions just like everybody else. But she's spouting her wisdom that she's learned through him, right? So, what is the light that she's talking about to you?
Our future as humans, as humanity on a global perspective, and my little thread in that light is my ability to just remember that if I can make a positive impact on one child's life, that I've done something that's worthwhile and kind of is good enough or some justification for everything that I've been through to do and impact someone in a positive way.
Yeah. That's very big, but also very, I don't want to say vague, but I want to say it's definitely a more theory sort of thing. What practical things do you do kind of on a daily basis to keep your wits about you or keep focused on that when you're in this horrible daily slog sometimes of dealing with people trying to attack each other with their children?
I just did a CEB webinar on what to do when you're dealing with Cruella de Vil on the other side. And
That's a good villain to choose.
yeah. And so, it's hard. And my theme throughout that was, how do I keep myself I want to say a curse word, but how do I keep myself together when everything's hitting the fan and everyone's being terrible with one another? And I'll rely on another quote, as I did in the presentation, is not my circus, not my monkeys. Although I'm trying to do good and impact the world for a better, even if it's one child at a time, I have to remember that I didn't create this mess. This is not the bed that I need to lay in. All I can do is do my best with the information that I have and not take it with me to bed. Easier said than done. Easier said than done. But real life, what I do is I focus on self-care as much as I can. I forgot about that for a really long time. And I reached my tether a couple years ago, had some burnout, and I've been able to find myself since then and come back to focusing on sleep, eating healthy. Of course, I love my ice cream and cookies. Movement always helps, and the little self-care that I can get in, I'll schedule, leave the kids with the grandparents, and I'll sleep or watch TV for a full day just to let my brain rot, and little things like that to try to remember that I too need a break. And in order for me to remain calm, cool, and collected with all the crazy people that I'm dealing with fighting over their kids, I also need a timeout.
Yeah, I totally get that. I mean, that's so important to have that time for you, especially if you're in a stressful position and you are the person who's absorbing all of this um, aggression and
Yeah.
negativity and just sometimes very vicious, lowbrow attacks against your client, and you're the one standing in the way, right?
Mhm.
It's one of the reasons that I don't like litigation because I don't really like standing in the way. So I will let you do that all day long.
Yeah.
It's not for me. Not for me.
Yeah. And luckily, what changed my perspective on this was a couple years ago. I was sitting in a MCLE for Minors Counsel in Santa Clara County, and they were talking to us about secondhand trauma. And as
Yep.
minors counsel and attorneys, were exposed to that secondhand trauma, and I had no words to explain that feeling. And they finally put a term to it and said, you just need to go talk to someone and focus on yourself and do the self-care. So it was perfect timing and exactly what I needed in my life at the moment to put a name to what I was going through, because it's not talked about very much. And
No.
you're right, we are standing between our clients and this evil person, thing, entity, whatever they're fighting, and their future and a good life. And so yeah, it takes its toll. So we got to
Yep.
remember to take care of ourselves.
It's a really good word, secondhand trauma. I have experienced that in my own field, less so than you, because I tend to be in a non-contentious atmosphere, but there's always contention, and sometimes people create it just around them naturally, just because
Yeah.
of their own situation. I wanted to just mention something that you mentioned a couple of times, which is called minors counsel. So in probate law, we call this a guardian ad litem, who is
Mhm.
basically a decision maker for a child, but for one specific case. I'm assuming that you're talking about something very similar.
Yeah. So in divorce cases, we can have the court adopt or appoint minors counsel, which are attorneys who only represent the child. And we act as the child's attorney in court, putting forth what we believe to be in the child's best interest.
Sure.
We can file whatever motion we want. We can take any position we believe to be in the child's interest.
Right. I do the same thing with children, but in a probate sense. So it's a different case, but the standards are very similar. I got a call from a family law attorney who was accidentally appointed as minors counsel in a probate case. So she called me and asked me, and she said, I'm turning this down. No way. So because there's just different standards. Let's bring this back to trust work for just a minute here. So I get calls quite often, actually, from people who are going through a divorce, and they are currently divorcing, but the family law attorney says, okay, one thing on the checklist here that you have to talk about is updating an estate plan. Mm-hmm. So talk to us about why that's necessary during a divorce.
Sure. So when a petition and summons is filed for dissolution, in California we call divorce dissolution, but they're interchangeable. They mean the same thing. Automatic temporary restraining orders are put into place that say you cannot do anything on the large scale to change any of your accounts, to hide money, or to take children out of the state without written court order or approval from the other party. This kind of freezes your assets to an extent in that the courts and our legislature wants to make sure that all community assets and even your separate property are kind of held in place pending a final resolution, because people have tried to hide their assets and avoid having to split it equally or whatever the case may be.
Sure.
So part of that includes your trust and estate plans. A trust and estate plan created before marriage, I'm assuming, generally leaves everything that's yours to your spouse. Mm-hmm. So if you were to die during the middle of your divorce without having changed any of that, everything's going to go pursuant to your estate plan, to your spouse. But because you're divorcing, I would like to think that maybe you want a different plan, or you were thinking there would be a different plan. Right. But the divorce in and of itself doesn't change your estate plan. So we reach out to estate planning attorneys to say, help us. This is not our area of expertise, but I think we need to revoke the trust, sever the joint tenancies, create a new will, create a new pour-over, and all the things that you guys do, just in case the unfortunate circumstance someone passes away during the middle of divorce.
Right. That's a really uncomfortable thing. Whenever people come to me and they have an existing trust, the course of action is to create an entirely new plan, but also revoke the old one. But when we revoke the old trust, we have to be very careful, because when you create a trust, you can accidentally automatically transfer things in. Mm-hmm. Or by matter of law, things can be transferred in. So you have to be very careful about how you create it. And when you are divorcing, you have to be very careful about how you revoke it, because technically when there's a revocation, the trustee is instructed to transfer all assets back to you. And that's illegal. You can't do that. And so instead, you have to revoke it very carefully to say, I want to revoke this trust and I intend to revoke this trust, but I don't actually revoke it right now at this moment, because if I did, then the trustee would be required to transfer everything back to me. But I don't want anything passing to my surviving spouse. So in the event that I pass away, I automatically, no matter what, done, I revoke it. There's this weird thing that happens, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's this weird thing that happens when someone dies and they're in a divorce proceeding, is that the divorce proceeding stops, because you cannot get divorced if you're dead. So there's no more atros. Gone. So you can revoke it the minute after you're dead. That's completely fine. So what we do is we say this is a contingent revocation, contingent upon death. And if you die, then it is automatically revoked. And then and at the same time, we create a new trust, but we do not fund it. We fund it with a hope that if you cannot transfer assets in, that it goes in from the old trust into the new trust. And we do that all the time.
Yeah.
A lot of estate planners don't want to do that because either they don't want to, or they don't work with the family law attorney to kind of understand the lines. But we do it quite often. I do it probably about once a month.
Yeah, no, and it's brilliant because, like I said, you're getting divorced for a reason. I would hope you would want to protect what you can.
Right.
In the unfortunate circumstance that you do pass away, then, we'll figure it out then. But it's a brilliant solution that you guys have been able to come up with as estate planning attorneys to figure out that loophole with the atros and whatnot.
There's not a lot of attorneys that do that, I think. Not a lot of estate planners that do that.
Yeah.
There's this weird thing that I've heard about, and I've seen anecdotal evidence, but I wanted to ask you if you knew that 10% of people who divorce and remarry the same person. Has that been your experience?
I have a few clients who have divorced and remarried and then divorced the same person. Yes. It's out there. It happens. Love is a fickle thing sometimes. Yeah. And apparently so is a divorce. So
yeah. Well, coming from a family law attorney, you definitely see what doesn't work, right? So when people come to you, they give you the dirty. You see kind of everything, right? So I talk to my clients all the time about what works in many marriages that I see. But in long term, steady relationships, what works or what doesn't work?
So I don't see what works. I only see what doesn't work. So
Okay.
you'll have to fill me in on your end on what works. But
Okay.
what definitely does not work is going to be, I think on the top of my list is abuse of alcohol and drugs. That's a
Sure.
huge, huge indicator of a marriage's ability to withstand the ups and downs that come with marriage.
Of course.
And then two, I think, is the consequences of real life. And what I mean by that is life is not easy. And for some reason, a lot of us have this preconceived notion that marriage is easy, and it's not. It takes work.
No, it's hard.
It is hard. And I, remember what I've watched a few years ago from Michelle Obama, not to get political, but something
Sure.
that she said that resonated with me is like those first 10 years that we had kids, I hated him. And I was keeping count of all the diapers that he changed versus all the ones that I changed and all the things that I was doing versus what he was doing. And it's true. Those first few years of having children is very difficult and it's not easy. And the lack of communication and empathy that we show one another when we're in the trenches of raising children comes out in a divorce, and people start getting angry and start trying to exert their influence or control over the other partner, which turns sideways and becomes something that neither one of them anticipated, and it gets ugly real fast. So I think, again, I see the worst. Those are the top two things that I feel are the worst of the worst that can trigger what used to be something that was healthy and happy, with a shattering of expectations and dreams, focusing on real life consequences of just being alive, and then bringing us to the sad dissolution phase of someone's future. Yeah.
And breaking down. Well, I can tell you that I see a lot of people at the end of their lives who have had very successful marriages, and no marriage is the same. And I'm
Yeah.
certainly not an expert in marriage, but what I can see, I see that people have a great deal of communication and respect, and they have agreement. They have agreement on some fundamental issues that generally cause a lot of conflict in their lives. And I remember seeing this from research study, I think that was done by the United States Department of Labor, that said that if you have a general agreement with your spouse, an honest agreement where you negotiated, you discussed this, you both have agreed to it, that if you have agreement on 4 issues, that your chance of divorce is less than 5%. And I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, they said that number one, it's what religion do we practice in our house?
Hmm.
Number two, how are we going to raise our children? Number three, how do we deal with finances and money? Who are we? How do we spend money? And number four is, how are we dealing with in-laws? How are we dealing with your family? And how are we dealing with my family? And I believe that if there's a general negotiated agreement with those 4 things, it takes out a lot of the potential conflict in marriage.
Yeah.
Because a lot of marriages happen because of financial infidelity or people not following along, right? And I've never been divorced, so I can't say for sure whether it is or is not. This is just research that I've done, that I've seen.
Yeah.
And maybe it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that I see people in my practice who have a good marriage and I see that they fit these criteria. And so maybe it's anecdotal. I don't know. But I think that if there's open communication, I think also in every marriage, there's kind of rocky times, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And nothing that's easy, nothing that is really worth doing is easy, right?
Absolutely agree.
If it's easy, then people have no value to it because it's easy to obtain. And so there's rocky times in all marriages, but understanding also that marriages change and they change over time. And sometimes you actually might have to start over and kind of rework how your relationship is.
I agree.
That's totally okay.
Yeah. And it's natural. I mean, we as humans go through all these different phases and growth spurts and changes as human beings. I mean, you can't compare an 18 to 25-year-old's brain who isn't fully developed to our 40-year-old selves.
Nope.
So yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. And thank you for sharing with the 4 things that work, because again, I only see what doesn't work. And Yeah, hopefully at some point people on a bigger scale can get that message and think about these things before they take the step.
You know, I remember seeing a podcast that was done by a man named Chris Willings, who's a very famous podcaster, and he was interviewing a divorce attorney for billionaires. The divorce attorney for billionaires was explaining that he sees the down and dirty, and he sees that people who try to appear wealthy oftentimes are completely and totally broke. And I see the same thing in my
Hmm.
business. I see people who come in and they're wearing flashy clothes and they're have expensive watches, but I see their balance sheet and I see
Yeah.
all their assets and I see that they are holding up an image for some reason, and I don't know why, but they're holding up an image of financial success, but that image just doesn't bear weight. There's a real good book that talks about that called The Millionaire Next Door, which is a research book by two economists in the 80s and 90s who studied the behaviors of self-made wealthy individuals for insurance companies because insurance companies didn't know how to sell products to them. And there was a Texas man that they had talked to several times who he quoted a phrase, and I've used it quite a bit: "Big hat, no cattle. You have a big hat, you don't have any cattle."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's surprising too on our end. We see these divorces where they come in and they're like, well, we had the perfect life and everything was getting paid and da 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 da, and now there's no money. And then we see the balance sheets and we're like, yep, this was all funded by credit. So there is no money, all to keep up with the Joneses. And it is interesting. Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting. You know, it's I'm a religious person, so I remember being in church once and having the leader at the time say something that was interesting. He said that if you look at the times in your life where time flew past, it was a sense of a time where you were at your most natural state. If you're with your family and suddenly time flies by, or with your friends and time flies by, he was explaining that that's your natural state. That's what brings you true joy. When I think about buying a watch, or I think about buying a car, I think about doing, getting something, there's definitely a drive to acquire things, but time doesn't flow faster. It's not
Mm-mm.
real joy. It's not real enjoyment. It's more a dopamine hit for the purpose of acquiring something. And so in my life anyway, I've tried to focus on things that really either improve myself or improve the lives of the people around me or help me serve better.
Yeah.
Because that's what makes me happy, helping people, really.
Yeah.
Everything else, doesn't really do a whole lot for me. I just want to help people, just like what you said. What gets
Yeah.
you up in the morning is the same thing that gets me up in the morning. I want to help as many people as I can, and I want to change their lives. This is one reason that in my firm that we don't accept client meetings for people who are just interested or curious. They just want to kick the tires, as it were. We don't take those meetings. Not because we don't want those people and not because we don't like them, but because they're not ready to make a serious change in their lives. And I only want to meet with people who want to make a serious improvement. I want to change people's lives. I'm not interested in tire kickers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Let's get to the meat and bones of what needs to happen to improve people's lives. And yeah, to
exactly.
kicking tires is not going to get us
Exactly.
there.
So let's go back to your Harry Potter thing, because I'm looking here at the sheet that you provided, and two out of the three things are Harry Potter. Why is that so just so you know, I've listened to the books 5 times through. So we're a big Harry Potter fan. My family, I can tell you that out of four of us, I'll tell you which ones, I won't tell you who, but we've taken the tests online, which is of course all fake, but we have three Ravenclaws and one Gryffindor, and that Gryffindor is definitely on her own.
But have you read the books?
Of course. Yeah, I've read them through twice, and my kids are reading them through. They're 12 and 10, and we've listened to them. I like to listen to them more because
Yeah.
Dan Brown is just fantastic.
Amazing.
But
Yeah.
but we're planning a trip to Harry Potter Land maybe in 2 years.
Oh, I cried the first time I went. I'm not gonna lie. I think the reason why it's had such an impact on my life is, it starts out with that little boy under the cupboard who had no hope,
No hope.
none. And something happened that completely changed his world, and that was just one person. I mean, there was a few, but really one person knocking down the door and saying, "Nope, we're going." And I think I was in high school when these books, maybe middle school when these books started. I don't remember. But I think I started reading them in high school. when I was starting to form my self-identity away from my family and, my church and things like that. And it solidified for me that there is hope, even when there's no light in the darkness.
Yep.
Keep looking for that, and that'll get you through. And I've latched on to that. And that hope is really what keeps me going. That at some point, and the world may not be better for me today, especially not with what's going on in the world, but at some point, someday, it will be better. And I will hold on to that hope for our future.
Yeah. That's a really good long-term perspective. I heard a joke a little while ago, and I don't know if you're gonna like this one, but it's that Star Wars is Harry Potter. I'm sorry, Harry Potter is Star Wars with sucky lightsabers.
With sucky lightsabers. Yeah.
Have you heard this joke?
Yeah. No, I haven't heard it, but I
You
have
haven't?
heard, the allegory, not allegory, but the explanation of these, like,
Very similar plot lines, right?
yeah, yeah.
Where you have an orphaned male protagonist who has no hope and has no way to escape, and he finds that an older, experienced man in his older age who has taught many people is going to take him under his wing and show him that he has magical powers, and he's going to explore this new area and get training with
Mhm.
with scruffy comic relief, and he's going to form a sister-like bond with someone else and move forward.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
change the world for the better.
and
Yeah.
change the world for the better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Patricia, I really enjoyed speaking with you today. How can people find you, and what are you looking for in new clients who search for you?
Oh, I'm at Hoover Krepelka, so you can search for our website or search my name, it'll pop up. But in terms of new clients, I feel that my favorite niche is going to be jurisdiction and international Hague custody kidnapping cases. I
It's a
can
very
explain.
narrow field.
It is. It is. Harkening back to started in California, went to Florida, came back to California as a child by decisions of my parent, if that gives any indication as to why I like jurisdiction and international kidnapping. But in terms of like my favorite client is someone who is open to understanding that we may not take a position that you want us to take, and we will advise you on what we believe to be in your child's best interest. Sometimes you may not agree, but if we can stay focused on that in the long term, that's what's going to be best for you and your family.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great. That's great. Do you have any questions for me? We've talked a lot about you, as we
No,
should.
thank you. I would love to know a little bit more about how you've dealt with what you alluded to earlier, when children are in the middle of this, when someone passes away in the middle of a divorce and a step parent. I don't know, I'm sure you've come up with brilliant outside of the box ideas on how to create trusts or resulting trusts, or I don't even know. Have you dealt with those?
So the question that Patricia asked is, how do you deal with an issue when there's a death during a divorce and there are child issues? I haven't dealt with very many of those because if there is a pending divorce and no one's seen an estate planning attorney, oftentimes the assets flow to the other parent. So there's kind of nothing for me to do. But if the cases that I have been involved in is where there is a divorce and the divorce is taken in 3 stages. The first stage is whether they are actually married. And so the court has separated their their marriage. They are now considered divorced, but the assets have not been divided. And so when that occurs, that there's an actual divorce, but the assets have not been divided, then we need to open a probate, regardless of whether there is a trust or not. A probate is a court proceeding to take control of an individual's assets and their rights if they die. So even if all of your assets are held in a trust, you may still need a probate because no one can sue to collect all of your things. Only you can sue, but you're dead. So who sues for you? The probate court needs to sue for you. So you need to open a probate. So in many instances, if there is a pending divorce and the fact of the marriage has been separated, I think the status has been separated, if I remember right, then you might still need a probate. And in those instances, then you're going to try to separate the assets in whatever way that you can. And you have to follow the estate plan, whatever it was. 99% of the time, it's all screwed up.
So
Yep.
basically, I'll be sending everyone to you for that problem.
Happy to. I know a couple of other I know a couple of other attorneys who do this as well. But the real crux of the matter is that during a divorce, there are so many things that you cannot do, but you can do workarounds. because you can't violate the court restraining order. But
Mhm.
what you can do is you can work within the rules of the probate law and the family code to make sure that you can actually get a plan either undone or created posthumously. So you create the tools ahead of time, but you fund them or do the transfers after death or after the divorce. And so
Yeah.
that's what we do. And I've seen it work through several times, and it's worked really well.
Yeah. What you described earlier of the trust contingent upon death is a brilliant solution. It's
Yeah,
great. So, yeah.
it works. It's a weird thing. I haven't ever tested it before in an appellate situation, because after death, the trust provisions are supposed to trigger in one way, but you revoke them so that they trigger another way. But the revocation isn't effective until death. So I don't know how that works out specifically, because I don't know if that's ever been tested, or at least my research hasn't shown anything. But in a general non-contested situation, seems to work just fine.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
ideally, no one contests, and then we'll never know the real answer.
I would prefer not to. Yeah. Patty, it's been wonderful talking to you. Where Patty works, she works at a firm called Hoover and Krepelka, which is one of the largest or the largest family law firm in California. You don't get big if you're not good. So they are very good. I send them referrals quite often. This has been the Keys to Your Legacy podcast focused on trust and estates issue. We've been very privileged to meet with Patty Zerbini today, who is just a wonderful person, and I'm really glad to touch base with her again. Subscribe to our podcast. You can find our podcast in any specific location or any place that you can find podcasts, and subscribe so that you never miss an episode, and follow along so that we can help you develop the keys to your legacy.
You've been tuning into The Keys to Your Legacy with your host, Elijah Keys. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, keyslawgroup.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.